Imagine you're the president of a country with a population of 40 million and a mediocre economy. You have a choice. Unleash the market and let the most efficient companies emerge from competition in a decade. Or support existing companies by investing in them. What will you choose? The South Korean government chose the second, easier path. They gave the country's most influential families the opportunity to quickly corner the domestic market before foreign competitors did. But as a result, these families began to entangle the entire country with their connections. Hyundai, for example, illustrates this well. Take a look. In 2004, Hyundai was headed by Chung Mong-koo, the son of the company's founder. He directly owned other corporations such as Globus and Changwon. The former was involved in logistics, the latter in defense. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. If we delve deeper, we'll see that Chung Mong-koo owns stakes in Hyundai Motor Company, which manufactures cars, and Hyundai Mobis, which produces auto parts. And they own a controlling stake in Kia. INI Steel and B&G Steel are the largest steel companies in Korea and supply Hyundai and Kia factories with the steel so essential for car production. It turns out that the Chung family can influence entire sectors of the Korean economy through a web of industrial and financial companies. And in exchange for the authorities turning a blind eye to South Korea's monopolization, Chaebol provides them with billions of dollars in financial support. The culmination of this alliance in South Korea was the wedding of the century, when in 1988 the daughter of the then president and the eldest son of the chairman of Sungkyong Group, South Korea's second largest chaebol after Samsung, married.
유학생이던 최태원 노소영 부부는 100년 가약을 맺습니다. 현직 노태우 대통령의 장녀와 결혼식장은 청와대 영빈관이었습니다.
It is surprising that from the 1990s to the present day, 3 South Korean presidents have been sentenced to prison and 1 even to death. The reason, corruption. The recent president of South Korea, 65-year-old Ban Keong-hee, was removed from office as a result of impeachment. But this is commonplace in South Korea. She was accused of extorting bribes from the heads of major South Korean companies, including Samsung. And in 2018, the son of Samsung's owner, the head of Samsung Electronics, was sentenced to 5 years in prison for bribing the president's girlfriend. And the president herself was sentenced to 25 years. And now you might think, well, corruption exists in every country. But South Korea is doing well. At least they're fighting it. Look, they jail presidents and the government constantly changes. But what if I told you that none of the presidents, let alone executed them? None of them served their time. They were all pardoned after a couple of years. In 2018, Ban Keong-hye was sentenced to 25 years for corruption. And in 2021, she was pardoned by a new president and she was released. Incidentally, some of these cases were investigated by South Korea's current president, Yoon Suk-yeol. He worked in the capital's prosecutor's office during the nationwide corruption scandal. But despite this past, when Yoon Suk-yeol became president, he didn't initiate any radical reforms to the Chaebol or eradicate corruption. It was a bit of a déjà vu. As a result of this impunity and monopoly, the Chaebol themselves became extremely ineffective. By the mid-1990s, the debt burden among Chaebol reached 500 and even 700%. To help you understand how critical this situation is, I'll give you a very simple real-life example. Imagine you own an apartment worth $200,000. You also have a car worth $20,000 and savings of $10,000. That's all your assets. Together, they're worth $230,000. But you're also saddled with a $150,000 mortgage. You also have a $15,000 car loan and an additional $8,000 in credit card debt. In total, your total debts amount to $173,000. And if you subtract your debts from your assets, that's practically everything. We get $57,000. That's your net worth, which belongs solely to you. Now we divide your debts by your net worth, and we get 303%. That's roughly the situation South Korean Chaebol was in the early 1990s. It seemed like it had assets, but they were obtained through loans that had to be repaid somehow. And so, huge loans and the inefficiency of its monopoly position turned Chaebol into a powder keg that was simply bound to explode. And it exploded by pure chance due to the Asian crisis in 1997. Not only South Korea's Chaebol, but also companies in Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taiwan had accumulated so much foreign debt over the past decades that when their economies slowed due to competition from Japan and China, the Asian tigers simply deflated. When it became clear that companies from South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taiwan were unable to cope with the debt they had incurred, major international speculators began selling the currencies of these countries and the securities of their companies. Against this backdrop, the US dollar strengthened dramatically. Between 1995 and 2002, it rose by 30% against major global currencies. Now, Asian countries were in dire straits not only because their economies were slowing, but also because their foreign currency debt had grown due to the exchange rate fluctuations. Foreign investors immediately lost faith in the rosy outlook for Asian markets and began selling their local currencies, dumping Asian company stocks. Investors' refusal to continue lending to Asian companies triggered mass corporate and bank bankruptcies, as well as a decline in production and rising unemployment. In South Korea, this led to a sharp spike in suicides, especially among working-age men. The South Korean won also lost its value in just a couple of months, against the dollar. The strength of large Korean corporations, the ability to bail each other out with cash because they were owned by just a few families, became their weakness. And the companies fell one after another, like a house of cards, as the crisis hit them all equally. In 1997, 11 Chaebols, including Kia and Daewoo, went bankrupt, and 10 large ones were on the brink of collapse. In 1998, the bankrupt Kia Corporation was acquired by Chaebol Hyundai. A year later, the South Korean government liquidated Daewoo, and its remaining divisions were bought out by foreign companies.
I think that we do see there's a seriousness that is being taken by the Chaebol owners at this point, and hopefully they're going to be completed on a sensible commercial basis.
Thanks to this bailout, South Korea rebounded, and by 2000, its economy had not only stabilized, but even begun to grow, though this was short-lived. Since the 2000s, the impact of the Chaebols has been felt not only by the South Korean economy, but also by ordinary citizens. The media is increasingly reporting on how children from wealthy families treat others as second-class citizens. For example, the daughter of the head of Korean Air, South Korea's largest airline, caused a scandal by throwing nuts at a flight attendant on a plane due to dissatisfaction with the service.
The alleged incident came to light just a few days after her elder sister Cho Hyuna, who infamously delayed a flight back in 2014 because her macadamia nuts were served in a bag, not on a dish.
And a young executive at the Delum Group, a construction and petrochemical company, demanded his driver remove his rearview mirror so they wouldn't see eye to eye in the reflection. Looking at the raw numbers, inequality in Korea isn't all that dramatic. It's only about 33% according to the Gini Index. That's roughly the same as France or Spain. But in South Korea, inequality is particularly acutely perceived by the population. It's no coincidence that the first South Korean film to win an Oscar, Parasite, reveals the disparity in living standards among ordinary Koreans, and the TV series The Squid Game is based on the idea of escaping poverty. I'll remind you of this again in a country that, from the outside, may seem like a technological paradise and one of the best places to live in the world. But the fact is that while the Korean elite live in expensive skyscraper districts, drive Rolls-Royces, Porsches, and Bentleys, and hang out with local celebrities, dining at expensive restaurants, some Koreans live right in Seoul, just like the characters in popular South Korean films. And the problem is, escaping this poverty is practically impossible. Chaebol pay really good money, but to get a job there, you have to beat out fierce competition. To achieve this, parents send their children to private schools, which focus on preparing for entrance exams. Students then hire tutors to help them ace their interviews for entry-level positions at Samsung or LG. Students without wealthy parents have to skimp on food and other luxuries just to afford a good education.
이렇게 직접 요리를 해 먹으면 돈을 많이 아낄 수 있거든요. 제가 계산을 해보니까 도시락 하나 싸는데 평균 500원 정도 되는 것 같아요. 놀고 싶죠? 놀고 싶고 연애하고 싶은데 지금 상황에 그렇게 해버리면 진짜 돌이킬 수 없을 것 같아서 조금 절제 많이.
So they live in tiny apartments, just 9 square meters, that cost $400 a month. And next door in the same room sits a student just like you, also studying 15 hours a day to beat you on exams. But let's say you're lucky. You were born into a wealthy family, had tutoring 2 or 3 times a week, and got straight A's at a university that cost your parents tens of thousands of dollars a year. But even that doesn't guarantee you'll get the coveted job you and your parents have been dreaming about for years. As a result of this frantic race for education, the market is literally saturated with smart people. And the competition for a job at, say, Samsung is simply incredible.
Over 100,000 people this year alone have proven their desire to work at Korea's top conglomerate, Samsung.
On an early Sunday morning, this large group of people is heading toward a local school ground. They're not adolescents looking for extra credit. They're job applicants to Korea's largest company, Samsung. Working for the conglomerate is considered a dream job as it offers stability, benefits, and good pay.
And it's impossible not to work at Chaebol because they're the main monopoly. And no other business offers such high salaries that will cover your expensive education. As a result, a quarter of young people aged 15 to 29 in South Korea remain unemployed. They are not hired for good positions, and for less money, they will never recoup their education costs. And today, 6 out of 10 Koreans believe they have no chance of climbing the social ladder. And this is not just a feeling. This is a reality that has been shaped by decades of social hierarchy, where family ties, education, and belonging to a certain class decide everything. Well, okay, let's say you're lucky and you break through and become a Chaebol employee, but this is only the beginning of a lifelong race. For a South Korean, work is not just a means of earning money, it's the meaning of life. If not you, then someone else will take your place, the one standing in line behind the fence. Because of such stress, Koreans are champions in the level of mental illness and suicide cases all over the world. Not in China, not even in Japan, a country with an extreme work ethic, there are not as many suicides as in South Korea. And strong pressure, excessive expectations from family, they only add fuel to the fire. In the eyes of many Koreans, how others see me is much more important than how I see myself. And as a result, we get not only one of the most suicidal, but also one of the heaviest drinking nations on the planet. But if you look at the alcohol consumption society in South Korea, there is nothing surprising there. The average Korean drinks about 8 liters of alcohol per year, is like the average resident of Thailand or Argentina. But it is important that this is not a drinking nation. But there are many alcoholics. 66% of all alcohol in Korea is consumed by 1/5 of the country's population. And this is what happens. Having played a decisive role in the process of industrialization and the country's integration into the global economy, effectively increasing GDP per capita by 210 times. More than in recent years, they have become the weakest point of the South Korean economy. They hinder the development of small and medium-sized businesses, limit freedom of entrepreneurship, and generate distorted competition. Small and medium-sized businesses, which provide 83% of jobs in the country, are facing serious problems. Chaebol does not leave them any chance. They copy their ideas or simply buy out a promising company, and as a result, the income gap is constantly widening, causing discontent in society, inequality, and unemployment among young people. And yet today, successful multi-billion-dollar family corporations like Samsung, LG, or Hyundai remain literally the skeleton of South Korea, on which not only the entire domestic economy rests, but also about which the government relies heavily on it. And despite all the scandals and criticism, there's practically nothing that can be done about the system. Otherwise, the entire system, so deeply ingrained in Korean culture, and the economy that has been built since the mid-20th century, will simply collapse. It turns out that South Korea is one of the most illustrative economies where behind the facade of prosperity lie fundamental social and political problems that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. Friends, thank you for watching my content and supporting my work. See you in the next video.